Hello you guys, it's Katie and welcome back to another video. For today's video I have a tutorial for how to crochet this cow. So we're going to get into the materials and then of course crocheting. But before that I do have a few things I wanted to mention to you guys. First off, this tutorial is definitely not meant for complete beginners. So if you've never crocheted before, I highly recommend you check out my video that includes everything you need to know to learn to crochet. And in that video, you will start out with a dishcloth that is a lot more straightforward than any sort of plushie will be. And I definitely recommend doing that first so that you don't get super frustrated with trying to make something that is way more complicated, such as this little cow. And if you do know how to crochet but you've never done amigurumi before, I also don't recommend this as a complete beginner project for amigurumi, which by the way, amigurumi is crochet plushies if you're unfamiliar. But I recommend this as like a little bit more of an advanced beginner project. Not that there's any like super complicated stitches or anything, but just that there's a lot of sewing involved to make this, and because of that, it is not as easy as something that requires only like 2 arms to be sewn on. Or for example, my bee tutorial is a great one to start out with for amigurumi. That one only requires you to sew on the 2 little wings. So that one would be a lot less frustrating and a lot less time consuming as well. But if you are up for the challenge, and this isn't very challenging, it's still beginner, but it's just not like absolute beginner. But if you are up for it, then we're going to get into making this cow. And now one more recommendation I have for you guys is to also check out the written pattern, especially if you're not super familiar with reading crochet patterns. It's a great idea to have the written pattern up at the same time that you are crocheting with the video. That way you can get the hang of starting to follow along in the crochet pattern as you are following along in the video. If you'd like to check out the free version of the pattern, you can find that on katiebeingcreative.com. I will link it below for you. Or if you would like to get the ad-free PDF version of the pattern that you can also print out at home, then that will be linked below for you as well. That is available on my Etsy, which is also Katie Being Creative. With all of that out of the way though, let's get on to materials. Of course, the number one most important materials are yarn when it comes to crocheting. So for this cow today, I have Premier yarns from Parfait Chunky. All the yarns and materials will be linked below for you guys, by the way. But I have Premier yarns Parfait Chunky, specifically in the colors white, black, and teddy bear. You do want a white, a black, and a brown color. Now you could do like pink and purple or blue, whatever you wanted, but for traditional cow colors, you would want white, black, and a little bit of brown. And now for this yarn, I use a 5mm crochet hook. I used to use a 6mm, so the written pattern actually has 6mm on it, but a 5 or a 6 is pretty good for this yarn when it comes to amigurumi. If you look on the package of this yarn, it suggests an 8mm hook. For amigurumi, almost always you want to go down a size or 2 at least in your hook size so that you don't get gaps within your work. So I go down to at least a 6mm, sometimes a 5mm. In today's tutorial, I am using a 5mm. So if you would like to switch out the yarns, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure that you go down a few hook sizes from what your yarn is recommending so that you won't get those gaps in your project, because you don't want to see the stuffing through it or have the eyes pop out or anything. Speaking of stuffing and eyes, you will need those materials. So we have safety eyes. I always get mine on Amazon. These are 14mm ones. The original pattern I used smaller ones, so you could also use smaller ones. You could get 14mm. Really whatever size is fine. If you have safety eyes already, just use whatever size you have. You just probably don't want any bigger than like 14 or maybe 16mm, because otherwise it would probably look a little disproportionate. But really whatever you have as far as safety eye sizes is perfectly fine. And then of course you will need stuffing to stuff the inside of your cow. Other materials, you're always going to need scissors, of course. So go ahead and grab you a pair of scissors. For pretty much all amigurumi as well, you're going to want a stitch marker, which is just like this little clip here. And you will want a yarn needle or a tapestry needle, whatever you'd like to call it. I like to use one that isn't too big so that you can get it through the stitches as you are sewing everything on. I will link this same size one below. And then it is nice to have these longer needles. I basically just use these to place items as I'm sewing them, which you'll see in the tutorial, but these are nice to have. They're not mandatory, they're optional, but they still are nice to have. So if you would like to invest in some of these, I will also have these ones linked below. Or if you've tried your hand at knitting and are now taking on crochet, you can use knitting needles for the same idea. Essentially, you'll just place them through the plushie like that to hold an arm or an ear or whatever in place, and then you'll be able to sew it and then remove it. So that's all the knitting needles or these longer needles are for. So for that reason, they are optional. You could like hold it in place and sew it, but to get everything looking proper and making sure it's in the right spots before you're sewing it, I do recommend having one of these items to use. Now they do also sell amigurumi sticks. A lot of times they shorten it to Ami sticks, so AMI sticks. They're similar to knitting needles, but they are made for you to use them for this purpose. So if you'd like to invest in some of those, you can as well. But I haven't even done that myself. I just use knitting needles because I tried my hand at knitting and never stuck with it. So now I just use knitting needles. So with that, that is all when it comes to your materials. So we are going to go ahead and get into crocheting in this video. Again, this can be a little bit complicated, especially if you are new to amigurumi. So if you need to repeat as many times in this video, there's going to be labels for everything so that you can go back within the video and have the instructions repeated. So with that, let's go ahead and crochet a cow. The materials I have to start out are the white yarn because I am making the head first, the crochet hook, and a stitch marker. For now, that is all you will need, and we're going to start on the head first. To make the head, we're going to do a magic ring. A magic ring is probably one of the most complicated things you can do in crochet, so please feel free to repeat this part in the video as many times as you need to get this part down. It is a little bit frustrating, so just take your time to go ahead and practice it and get this part down. For the purposes of today's video, by the way, I'll be referring to this end of your yarn as the tail, and then this end that's attached to the ball of yarn as your working end. So the way I make a magic ring or a magic circle, whichever you'd like to call it, there's multiple ways, but here's how I do it. I take the tail and lie it over my middle finger and my pointer finger, and I will go ahead and hold it down with my thumb, and then I will wrap the working end around the back of those two fingers and make an X shape in the front here. And then we can leave this working end lying down and flip over your fingers to where you have these two lines parallel to each other. Now you're going to take your crochet hook and you're going to put it underneath the first loop and grab that second loop, pulling it under the first. As you're pulling it under, you want to twist the hook. So I'll show you that again. Grabbing this one, pulling it under and twisting the hook to make a little loop here. And then I'm going to slide this off my fingers. So just remove my fingers from this circle. And this circle here is your magic circle. To start out the magic circle, you're going to do 1 chain. Now make sure this loop that is around your hook is tighter around it so that it's not super loose. And then we're going to make a chain. So I'm going to wrap this working end around the back of the hook and then pull up that loop, which is just pulling that one under the current loop that's on your hook. And that makes a chain, which is how we start out the magic circle. Now in this magic circle, if you're looking at the pattern, it says to single crochet 6. So now we are going to single crochet 6 into the magic circle. So leave everything lying the way it is. You want this tail to still be here, and you want to do your 6 single crochets. So a single crochet looks like inserting into the circle, then yarning over, which is again wrapping around the back, and pulling up a loop, which is just pulling it through the circle, then yarning over again, so wrapping around the back of the hook, and pulling this 3rd loop under the first 2. 1, 2. And that makes a single crochet. Now we're going to do this 6 times into this circle. Let's do another one. We are inserting the hook into the circle, yarning over and pulling up a loop, which is pulling it through the circle. With the 2 on your hook, we are yarning over and pulling through those 2. Now that makes 2 single crochets. I'm pausing for a moment to grab this tail and go ahead and pull on it a little. And as I'm pulling on this tail, I'm holding on to the stitches I made. So holding it, and this loop here should start to tighten. I'm going to leave it still loose, but I want to tighten it. Probably about that much. There's no magic amount, but tighten it a little. And now I'm going to continue these single crochets into this loop. Again, making sure that this tail stays in place. You want the tail to be underneath the stitches you are making. So I don't want to push this tail back and out of the way and then do the stitches, because then you can't tighten it. So you want the tail to be right underneath what you're working on, and you're going to insert into the circle, yarn over, pull up that loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. Now that made 3 single crochets. I'm going to do 3 more for a total of 6. So there's my 6 single crochets. Once I have all 6 of them, I'm going to pull on this tail, again holding my stitches, pull on the tail until everything gets tight and there's no gap in the middle. And then that is why they call it a magic circle, because there is no gap in the center of your stitches now. Now to go ahead and make this a circle, I will find that first single crochet. So for me it is right here, and go ahead under that single crochet. So both loops of that single crochet, and I will yarn over and do a slip stitch. So that is just pulling under the single crochet and then under this current loop on the hook as well. And that makes everything a circle. Now is where I grab the stitch marker and I go ahead and place the stitch marker into this slip stitch I just made. I'm counting this as the last stitch of round 1. So placing that in there, go ahead and clamping it, and now you have your first round done. Now we're moving on to round 2, which is increases in every single stitch around, and we should end up with 12 at the end of this. We have 6 now, increasing in each would make it 12. Now on to round 2, we are doing those increases. So I'm going to insert into the next stitch under both loops. I'm going to yarn over and pull up that loop, which gives me 2 on my hook, yarn over and pull through those 2. That makes 1 single crochet. Now to do an increase, I'm going to do a second single crochet into that same stitch. So right in that same stitch, inserting my hook, yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over, and pulling through. And that makes an increasing stitch. So let's do that into the next one. I am inserting into the next stitch, yarning over, pulling up a loop, which creates 2 on your hook, then yarning over, pulling through those 2. And now we're going to do that a second time, inserting my hook, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over and pulling through 2. That has created 2 increases, which is 4 stitches total. I'm now going to do this until I have a total of 12 stitches in this round, which is 6 increases total. Now I'm here at the last stitch. I am going to remove this stitch marker and place that last increase here. So 1 and 2. And then place that stitch marker into that last single crochet I just made. So this is now round 1 and round 2 of the head completed. Now for the next rounds, we're going to stagger the increases. So first we're going to do an increase. So just like the last round, going into the next stitch, yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over and pulling through the 2 to create a single crochet. And to make this single crochet an increase, we're going to go into that same stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. That creates 1 increase. Now we're going to do just 1 plain single crochet on its own. So into the next stitch, inserting my hook, yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over and pulling through the 2. And now repeating this all the way around. So again, inserting into the next stitch, yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over, pulling through 2, and into the same stitch because we're doing an increase, inserting my hook, yarning over and pulling up a loop, yarning over and pulling through 2. That creates another increase. Now that we did the increase, we're doing 1 single. So into the stitch, yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over, pulling through 2. And doing this all the way around, again, you should be doing this 6 times and have a total of 18 stitches at the end of this round. I now have 2 stitches left of this round, so I'm going to do my final increase, which is again 2 single crochets into the same stitch. And then I'm going to remove the stitch marker and do that final single crochet on its own. And then place the stitch marker into that stitch I just made. Now I'm sure you're starting to see a pattern here. The next round is going to be increasing in 1 and then single in the next 2 and repeating that all the way around. So let's do that together. So into the next stitch we are inserting the hook, yarning over and pulling up the loop, yarning over and pulling through 2. Now to create the increase we are inserting into the same stitch, yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over, pulling through 2. And now we are doing 2 singular ones. So into the next stitch, yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over, pulling through 2. And the second singular one, inserting my hook, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, pulling through 2. And now back to increase, and then 2 singles, and repeating this all the way around. But you should be repeating this 6 times for a total of 24 stitches. Now that I have 3 stitches left in this round, we are doing the last of this repeat. So I am increasing to this stitch and then doing a singular, then removing the stitch marker, placing a singular there as well, and then placing the stitch marker back. And again, this is round 4. You should have 24 stitches at the end of this round. Now round 5 is our last increasing round. So we're going to be doing an increase in the next stitch. So 2 single crochets in the same one. Then we're going to be doing 3 singulars. So 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to do an increase and another 3. And this is the repeat we're doing all the way around. Now that we have 4 stitches left in this round, we'll be doing the last repeat. So I'm doing an increase, and then 1 singular into the next, singular into the next, and finally removing the stitch marker and doing another singular, then placing the stitch marker back. At the end of this round, you should have 30 stitches. So if you were to go along a count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 30 all the way around. And now for rounds 6, 7, and 8, so 3 rounds total, we're going to be doing just singulars all the way around. So instead of doing 2 and then singular, singular, whatever, we are just doing a singular and a singular all the way around, and you should have 30 every time you complete it, going around 3 times total. So if I were you, I would be keeping track with some sort of row counter or making tally marks. Once you get back to the stitch marker and remove it and replace it, every single time you're writing another tally mark or moving your stitch counter up by 1 so that you know how many rounds you have gotten through, and you would have needed to be completed with 8. So I'm going to come back once I have rounds 6, 7, and 8 done, which is again just singulars all the way around. So now that we're completed with round 8, I'm going to go ahead and add my safety eyes. So I'm going to show you where you want to place these. So first I'm just going to pull up this loop where my hook currently is and set the hook off to the side so it's not in the way. And now we're looking here and I have the eyes. I am using a slightly bigger eye than I normally use for this pattern, but it'll still be cute either way. I believe these are 14, but you can use pretty much any size you would like as long as it's not going to be like huge, of course. But now we're going to figure out the placement. So we just did round 8, which is this last one here. We want to place these between 5 and 6. So I'm going to count backwards: 8, 7, 6, and 5. So between 5 and 6. So I'm going to place my first one here between 5 and 6. And just place it into the project between 5 and 6, which again, 8, 7, 6, 5. So right in between here. And now you want to count out about 5 stitches to the left or to the right, whichever way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which I know can be hard to count stitches in rows as you are learning to crochet. So just try to get the hang of seeing where each one is as you're making it, and then it'll be easier to realize what each stitch is. So I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then placing over here the second eye also in between rounds 5 and 6. So now I'm placing that eye right here, about 5 stitches in between. Now that we have the eyes in here, we need to flip the project inside out and put the backs onto the eyes. So you just want to take these backs, place them over top, and push down until it clicks. I don't know if you could hear that, but it did make a little click, almost like a pop noise. That's what you want to hear. There we go. And I just like to push it down one more time to make sure it's extra secure, make sure it's in there. You can even pull from the front to make sure it's sturdy and that they're not going to come out. Just be careful that you don't put those backs on until you are 100% good with your eye placement. Like, you want to look at them and make sure they're not lopsided or anything before you put those backs on, because they're pretty much impossible to get off once you have them on. So now that we have those on, we're going to go ahead and continue with the head. So I'm just putting my hook back onto that loop and tightening it around. And now we're going to move on to round 9, which is our first decreasing round. So I'm going to show you how to do an invisible decrease, because an invisible decrease and a regular decrease are both pretty simple and they're not very hard to do. But an invisible decrease you won't be able to see as easily as a regular decrease. So to make your project cleaner, we're just going to do invisible decreases. So first to do an invisible decrease, we are inserting our hook into the front loop. So when you're looking at a stitch, you have the little V. You're going to go into the front of that only. Normally you'd be going under both. Right now we're going under just the front of this first stitch, and then while your hook is still in there, we're going into the front of the stitch right next door. So it should look something like this, where you have the front of the 2 stitches on your hook. Then we're going to yarn over, pull up the loop, which is pulling under both of those front loops. So 1 and 2. And then there's 2 on your hook, so you're going to yarn over and pull through those 2. And that makes an invisible decrease, which the decrease is just combining 2 stitches together so that we are going back down to make a circular shape. Now we're going to do 2 regular just singles. So into the next stitch, make sure you're not going into one of the previous ones. Into the next stitch, we are yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over and pulling through 2. And we're doing this one more time. So inserting our hook, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, pulling through 2. So now we're going to repeat that all the way around until we have 2 stitches remaining. So I'll show you one more time. So an invisible decrease is inserting your hook into the front loop of the next stitch. And then the stitch right next door, we're also going into the front loop. Just like that. And we are yarning over, pulling through both of those front loops to have 2 on our hook, then yarning over and pulling through 2. Again, that makes an invisible decrease. So now we're going into the next 2 stitches. It's just plain singles. And then doing an invisible decrease. And again, the next 2 as plain singles. And I'm repeating this around until I have 2 stitches left. So I've repeated this until there were 2 stitches left. In these final 2 stitches, I'm just going to do a single in each one. So into the next one, inserting, yarning over and pulling up the loop, yarning over and pulling through the 2, and then removing the stitch marker and doing that in this final stitch. And placing the stitch marker back. This should now leave you with 23 stitches in the round, and that was round 9 completed. Now at the end of this round, I'm going to stop and start adding stuffing. I'm not going to add very much yet, I'm just going to add a little and we'll continue to add stuffing as we go. So I'm just going to add a little bit here, not to the point where it's overflowing or anything, but just to have a nice little base in there. And we want to be shaping the plushie as we go with the stuffing. So we're not just like adding a ball of it in there, we're kind of massaging it around with our fingers to actually give the head shape. Because again, we are making the head, so you want to be giving it a circular shape. So now we're moving on to round 10, which is going to be decreasing and then 1 single. So again, to do an invisible decrease, we are inserting into the front loop of that first stitch, then inserting into the front loop of the stitch right next door, yarning over and pulling under those 2. Then we are yarning over and pulling through 2. And now for the next stitch, we're doing just a plain single crochet. And we are repeating this all the way around until you have 2 stitches remaining. Now that we have 2 stitches remaining, we're just going to do a plain single crochet in each one. So here's one, and then removing the stitch marker, here is the second one. And then I'm going to add that stitch marker back. And now I'm going to add some more stuffing. So again, shaping the head as I go. And it's totally up to you, the firmness that you would like it to be. I want this to be squishy, but not like squishy to the point where it looks limp. So I'm gonna add about that much stuffing, and I can always add a little more as I'm continuing as well. At the end of round 10 here, you should be ending with 16 stitches. Now for this final round of the head, round 11, we're going to be doing invisible decreases all the way around. So again, inserting your hook into the front loop of the first stitch, then into the front loop of the stitch right next door, yarning over and pulling through those front loops, and then yarning over and pulling through 2. And repeating this all the way around. Now that I have 2 stitches remaining, I'm going to remove this stitch marker and do that last invisible decrease. And complete that stitch. And now we should have 8 stitches in this last round, round 11. Now this is the very end of the head. So what we're going to do is finish off with a long tail. So you're going to want a pretty long tail in order to be able to sew the head to the body. So I'm going to leave a couple of inches, maybe like 6 to 8 inches I think would be good. So I'm going to cut the yarn over here with those about 6 to 8 inches. Just go ahead and cut it with your crochet hook, yarn over, and pull through, and continue to pull through until this tail goes all the way through. And then you can pull that tight, and that is called finishing off or fastening off, whichever you'd like to call it. Now we're going to continue to add a little bit of stuffing until we're happy with the shape of the head. So now that I'm happy with the amount of stuffing in the head, it's pretty circular and everything, I'm going to now take this yarn needle and add it to the end of my yarn here, so it makes it easier, for me at least, instead of trying to put this end directly into the hole here. I like to fold this over and pinch it, and then it's a lot easier to poke the yarn through this hole on the needle and then pull it through and leave yourself a little bit hanging out. Now we're going to flip this head upside down and we're going to sew it closed. So in order to do this, we're going to go in and out of these stitches that are left here. So 8 times, because there were 8 stitches left at the end of this round. So first I'm going from the inside to the outside. You can go from the outside to the inside also, it doesn't matter. But I'm picking this first stitch and I'm only going into the front loop with my needle. So just into the front loop, pushing the needle all the way through and pulling it tight. And then now that I went from the inside to the outside on this stitch, the stitch next door, I'm going to go from the outside to the inside. Again, only that front loop, pushing it through and pulling until it's tight. And I'm doing that all the way around. So here's number 3 and number 4, all the way until I've done all 8 of these. And once you've done all of the stitches, you can just pull tight. I forgot to show you that part, but you can just pull tight and then it should close up this gap. And now it should look something like this. You'll want to leave this tail, so don't cut this off or anything. Just go ahead and slide your needle off of it and set this head off to the side. Now that we have the head completed, we're going to move on to brown yarn to make the nose piece, or in the pattern it's referred to as the muzzle. We're going to make that piece right now. To start this out, instead of doing a magic circle, we're going to do a chain. So to do a chain, we're first going to have to make a slip knot. I make a slip knot by laying the tail down towards me and then taking this working end, which is attached to the ball of yarn, and laying it over top to make a ribbon shape. Then you can pick up this loop here and grab the working end, tuck it under this loop, grab it through, hold on to that, and hold on to the tail and the working end at the same time, and pull the two apart until that knot gets tight. That makes a slip knot. Now we're going to take the crochet hook and place it on that slip knot. You can set it down and take this tail and working end and pull them apart in order to tighten the slip knot around the hook. Now that it's tied around the hook, we're going to start doing chains. You're going to chain 5. So yarn over, wrapping the hook around the back, and pull up a loop, pulling it under. That makes 1 chain. We're going to do that 4 more times. Here is the 5 chains. Now working into the second chain from your hook, you're going to do an increase. So that's going to be 2 single crochets into the same one, just like it was for the head. The next 2 chains, we're now going to do just 1 single crochet. And then this 4th and final chain, we're going to do another increasing stitch into. Now, instead of chaining and turning like you normally would, we're going to flip this and work into the opposite side of the chain. And we're going to repeat the same stitches that we did earlier. So this first one is an increase. Then we'll do 2 singles. And finally, 1 more increase into the back of this last chain. And now is where we'll place the stitch marker, adding it to this last stitch that we just made, the last stitch of round 1. And now we are working in rounds, so just continuing along. So we have 1 more round to do, which is just singles all the way until the end. So I'm placing 1 single into each stitch until I get to the stitch marker and placing that final one. Now I just have that last single crochet left. So I'm going to remove the stitch marker and place it there. And you'll want to flip this right side out. Automatically when you're making amigurumi, it will try to have this wrong side, which is really no right or wrong with anything in crochet, but technically this is the wrong side where the tail is coming out of. So you want to flip it to the correct side. So now with this muzzle piece completed, we are just going to finish off with a long tail. We'll need a long tail in order to sew this onto the face. So I'm going to leave probably like 8 inches minimum and go ahead and cut the yarn, and then we can yarn over and pull this all the way through until it is tight. As you can see, I kind of got some yarn flakes in there, so I'm just gonna pull those out and then pull this until it's tight. And this is the muzzle / nose piece, which will be sewn onto the face. But we're gonna make all the pieces first and then we'll move on to sewing everything. Next we are switching to a different color again. This time we're moving on to black, and the black is going to be for the ears. Now I'm only going to make 1 on camera. You do need to make 2 of these. So once you finish all of the steps over 1 time, you'll do it a 2nd time. So for the ear, we're going to start out with a magic circle, which again, I place the tail over my middle finger and my pointer finger like this, and then I'll hold it down with my thumb, and then I'll wrap around the back and back to the front to make an X shape. And then when you flip your fingers, it should be 2 parallel lines. I'm going to take my crochet hook, push up on this first one and grab this second and pull it under and twist. Then I'm going to slide it off my fingers and make a chain stitch right here. And then I'm going to complete 4 single crochets this time into the magic circle. So you want to leave this tail where it's laying. You don't want to move it at all. Just complete those 4 single crochets into the magic circle. And you want to do these kind of loose so that it won't be super hard to pull this tail, because now we want to pull this tail until everything gets tight. And now we're going to find that first stitch, which I apologize, I know black yarn is so hard to see, but we're going to find that first stitch and insert our hook in there. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through everything to create a slip stitch in order to make everything a nice circle. And we're going to place this stitch marker into that slip stitch we just made right behind the hook. So that was round 1 of the ear. Now on to round 2, we're going to insert into the next stitch and do an increase. So 2 single crochets into the same stitch. On to the next one, we're going to just do 1 singular. Next stitch, we're going to do another increase. So 2 single crochets into the same stitch. And then finally, we're at the end of this round here. We're going to remove the stitch marker and do 1 singular. Now placing this stitch marker back. And now that we have 2 rows done, I'm going to go ahead and flip the project right side out so that that tail is on the inside. Round 3 is just 1 single crochet into each stitch. So you should be doing 6 single crochets around. And now I'm going to remove that stitch marker. And I did already place that last single crochet while the stitch marker was in there. Now we are finishing up this ear. So I'm going to take this tail from the inside and tuck it on the inside here. And now we're going to pinch the ear together and crochet the 2 sides together. So I'm going to insert my hook into the next stitch, and then with it folded, find that stitch that's directly across, insert your hook into that stitch as well, and then do a single crochet through both of those stitches, and doing this 2 more times for a total of 3. Since there was 6 stitches in that round, you'll be crocheting 3 to close up the ear. And then we want to leave a long tail for sewing again. This one you won't need as long of a tail. I'm gonna say this is like 5 to 6 inches. So I'm going to cut the yarn, and as always, yarn over, pull through everything, and then pull it tight. And this creates 1 ear, so you'll need to repeat this over again to make the second ear. Now you should have 2 ears before moving on, and we're going to move on to brown again, this time for the horns. So you're also going to need to make 2 of these. The horns also start out with a magic circle of 4, just like the ears. So we're going to place this tail over my middle finger and my pointer finger, and then hold down with my thumb, wrap around this working end around the back, and then back to the front, making an X shape, and then flipping over to these 2 parallel lines, taking the crochet hook, pushing it up on the first loop and grabbing the second one and rotating as we go under, and then grabbing this working end and pulling it under to make a chain, then removing your fingers, again leaving the tail and the circle where it is, and just going directly in here and placing 4 single crochets. And now you can take this tail and pull it tight to tighten the circle. Then we're going to find that first stitch, insert our hook, yarn over and pull through everything to complete a slip stitch, and then take this stitch marker and place it into that slip stitch. Now for the horns, there's no increases or anything. We're just going to do 2 rounds of single crochets. So I'm just going into the next stitch, placing a single crochet, then into the next one, another single crochet, doing this 3 times, and then for the 4th time, removing this stitch marker and placing the final one, placing this stitch marker back. Now I'm going to flip everything right side out so this tail can be on the inside. And we're going to complete 1 more round of just single crochets all the way around. So for the final stitch, removing the stitch marker, placing that single crochet, and then again leaving a tail that is probably about 4 or 5 inches, maybe a little less. Cutting that yarn, yarning over and pulling through until it's tight. And with this tail here, I'm just going to tuck this on the inside. It might be a little difficult to do. If it is, you could also cut the tail, so that's actually what I'm going to do here. But I do want to leave a little bit, which makes sure this is the tail on the inside, not the tail on the outside that you're doing this to. Cut with just a little bit left over, and then you can take your crochet hook or your needle, whatever you prefer, and shove that little tail inside. And now that makes a little horn that will get sewn on to the top of the head. So you'll need to repeat this over again to have 2 of these. Now that you have 2 horns, we're going to move on. We're now using black yarn, and we're going to make an arm, which again you'll need to repeat twice in order to have 2 arms. The arms also start with a magic circle with 4 stitches. So I'm going to just complete that really quick. I've explained it to you already a few times, so I feel like you're probably getting bored of hearing it. If you do need a recap, you can always rewind in this video to see how I did it for the ear or for the horn, but you just need 4 single crochets and then tighten that loop and find that first stitch, insert your hook, yarn over and pull through everything in order to make a nice circle. And then grabbing that stitch marker and placing it behind your hook. Now finding the next stitch here, we are going to increase. So doing 2 single crochets into the same stitch. And we're going to do that 3 more times. So all the way around we are doing increasing stitches. So I've done 3 out of the 4 increases. I'm going to remove this stitch marker, do 1 single crochet, and then 2 into the next. But before we do that, final stitch for this increase, which this is the very last one, I'm going to show you how to change colors at the same time. We're now going to be changing from black to white so that it looks like a little hoof, and then into the arm that is white. So inserting into this same stitch, again, yarning over and pulling up the loop just like you would do for a single crochet, but leaving it here and grabbing the white yarn, and then placing this tail here with a little bit of a tail left over, placing that on top of your hook and pulling that through to complete the single crochet. So now you can pull the working end of the black yarn tight and then place that stitch marker into that last stitch, which is that last black stitch. Now that you've changed colors, you can cut the end of the black yarn, the working end here, leave a little bit of a tail. Go ahead and cut that. I'm gathering all kinds of fuzz from this yarn. And now we're just slowly working with the white yarn. What I will do is set this down and grab the 2 tails left from the black yarn and the white yarn and go ahead and tie these together once or twice in order to secure them. This is going to be on the inside, so it's not going to be visible or anything, but you do just want the color change to be secure. So now that I have secured the color change, we're going to find this next stitch and do a single crochet. And we are doing single crochets all the way around for this whole round, round number 3. And then we are doing that once more for round number 4. So there should be 8 single crochet stitches in each one of your rounds for round 3 and round 4. So here is where that stitch marker is. I'm removing the stitch marker, doing 1 final single crochet for round 3, then placing that stitch marker back and doing 1 single crochet for each one of these stitches for round 4. And here's that final stitch for round 4. So I remove the stitch marker and place that final stitch, and then put the stitch marker back. Right now I'm going to take a second and just poke these tails in the inside of the arm so that we won't see them. And then for round 5, we're starting out with a decreasing stitch. So we're going to insert into the front loop of the next stitch, and then the stitch next door we're going to insert into the front loop of that as well. Then yarn over, pull through both of those front loops, yarn over again, and pull through 2 to complete that decrease. And then we're going to do 2 plain single stitches, so 1 and 2. And now we're going to do another decrease, so into the front loop of the next stitch, into the front loop of the stitch behind it, yarn over and pull through both of those front loops, yarn over and pull through 2. Then a single stitch, and removing that stitch marker and placing 1 final single stitch. Now for this arm, we're using the same technique that we did for the ears, where we're folding it and crocheting the 2 sides together. So we're inserting into the next stitch, then finding that stitch that's directly across once it is pinched together, and inserting into that one, Then yarning over, pulling through both of those stitches to have 2 on your hook, yarning over and pulling through those 2. And doing this 2 more times for a total of 3. Since we ended off with 6 stitches at the end of round 5, we are finishing off with 3 at the end of this arm. So yet again, we are finishing off with a tail. I'm going to cut about right here, and then we're going to yarn over and pull through that loop again until everything is tight. And that completes an arm. So now we're going to do this a second time in order to have 2 arms. Alright, now that we have 2 arms, we are going to make some spots. So we're going to need black yarn again for that. So the pattern is written to have, this pattern is written to have 2 small spots and 1 large spot. So that's what I'm going to show you. But you can do 2 large ones and 1 small one. You could do 3 large ones. You could do 4 or 5 spots, whatever you want. I would recommend for now starting out with these 3 that I'm making myself, because you can always make more, but it'd be kind of silly to make a bunch and then not end up using them, because the cow body is kind of small, so you don't want like a million spots on it. So anyways, pattern is written to have 3. So these spots are starting out with a magic circle. And again, we are just doing a magic circle how we've done it every time. And these small spots have 4 single crochets into the magic circle. So once we have that, we're going to pull it tight. And then to make this spot a circle, we're going to find that first single crochet and slip stitch into it. And now these spots are pretty small because the body of the cow and this cow in general is pretty small. So this is all for your spot. So we're now going to leave a tail again in order to sew it. So cutting that yarn and pulling through a loop until everything is tight. And that makes one of these small spots. So if you would like to follow the pattern how it's written, you would need to make a second one of these small spots, which I'm going to do off camera. So now that we have 2 of these small spots, I'm going to make 1 more larger spot, and then we'll finally be moving on to the body. All of this completes all the little pieces we'll have to sew on. So the large spot is very similar to the small ones, except we are doing 6 single crochet into the magic circle. So I've made my magic circle. Now I'm doing these 6 single crochets. So there's 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then I'm finding that tail and pulling it tight. Then finding that first stitch, inserting my hook, yarning over and pulling through everything to create a circle, and then finishing off with a tail. So there's my tail and my finish off. So that is the larger spot. And in comparison, this is one of the smaller ones. So they're really not that much different at all. But I would say you want at least 3 spots. That's what I'm going to have for mine. Like I was saying earlier, if you would like to make more, you can. But for now, I'm going to have 3. Okay, now we are back with the black yarn and we are making the legs that work into the body. So to start out the first leg, we're going to make a magic circle. And again, we're starting with black. This magic circle is going to have 6 single crochets. 1, here's 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Again, you want to make sure you do those loosely so that it is easier to pull that tail tight. And then we're going to find that first stitch and slip stitch into it in order to make the magic circle a circle. So now we're going to place the stitch marker into that slip stitch there, and we're going to continue on to round 2, which round 2 is made up of increases all the way around. So we're going to do 2 single crochets into each one of these stitches, which once you have completed that, you should have 12 single crochets. So I've done 5 out of the 6 increases. So I'm now removing that stitch marker and placing the 6th increase, and then placing that stitch marker back. And now that I've done 2 rounds, I'm going to go ahead and flip this right side out so that that tail is going to be on the inside. And now for round 3, we're just doing a round of singles. So you'll have 12 single crochets once you're completed here. And in the very last stitch of this round, we're going to change to white. So now removing the stitch marker from the last stitch, starting the single crochet by inserting my hook, yarning over and pulling up the loop, and then finishing the single crochet by grabbing the white yarn, placing the tail over top of the hook, and leaving a little bit of a tail and pulling it through to complete the single crochet. As you can see, as I did that, the tail got a little smaller, so I'm just going to pull on the tail in order to leave some more room. And then I'm going to pull on the working end of the black yarn in order to tighten everything. And just like we did for the arm, we're going to cut the black yarn with a little bit of a tail, and then we're going to tie these 2 tail ends together. Then, so we don't lose where we are, we're going to place the stitch marker into that last black stitch, and we're going to continue around with white for 3 rounds. So rounds 4 through 6, we're going to do a single crochet into each stitch. So again, 3 rounds of this. This is round 4. I'm going to also do this for round 5 and round 6, and then I will come back to you. So I'm here at the end of round 6. I'm removing the stitch marker and placing that final single crochet. And now for this leg only, so only this first leg that we're making, we are going to finish off and leave a tail. So I'm setting it down, grabbing my scissors, cutting the end, then yarning over and pulling through everything. And this completes one of the legs. Now, since you'll need 2 legs, you're going to repeat all of this over again, but once you get to the end of round 6, do not finish off. I'm going to make all of this over again off camera, and I'll come back to you right when I'm almost done with round 6 and show you what to do, we'll be connecting the 2 legs instead of finishing off with that second one. So put this one to the side, repeat the process, make the second leg, and I will be right back to you. Alright, here I am at the end of round 6 for the second leg. So I am placing this final single crochet and placing the stitch marker back. And now is where we're going to connect the 2 legs. This is why we're not finishing off with this second leg, because we're just going to continue working into the first leg in order to combine the 2. So there's multiple methods of doing this. My method is just to insert your hook into really any one of the stitches of the first leg. So I normally go for the stitch right next to where I finished off, and then pull through the yarn all the way through to make a slip stitch. And now the 2 legs are together, and actually what I'm going to do is consider this my last stitch of the round, so I'm going to remove the stitch marker from where it was and place it into that slip stitch. So now we are continuing on to round 7, and we're just crocheting around the 2 legs as if they are one. So you'll see what I mean as we continue. So first we are doing a decreasing stitch, which is inserting into the front loop of the next stitch and then into the front loop of the stitch next to that. Yarning over, pulling through both of those front loops, yarning over again and pulling through 2. So that makes 1 decreasing stitch, and then we're doing 4 regular single crochets right in a row. So inserting my hook, yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over, pulling through 2. So that was 2, 3, and 4 single crochets. And now repeating this all the way around. So we're doing a decreasing, which is front loop of the next stitch, front loop of the stitch after that, yarning over through both of the front loops, yarning over and through both loops, and then doing 4 single crochets. So 1, 2, 3, and now that was the final stitch of the first leg. So we're now going into the second leg, making sure we're not inserting into the same stitch where we started from or anything, making sure we're going into the next one and doing that 4th stitch. And then we're doing another decrease. And then 4 singles. So there's 2, 3, and 4. Then doing a decrease. And the final 4 single crochets. So here's 1, 2, 3, and then removing that stitch marker and placing the 4th where the stitch marker was. And now placing that stitch marker back. And that is round number 7 done, and now the 2 legs are crocheted together, and we're just going to crochet around as if it is one now, because it technically is one now. Now you will notice there is a gap here. So what I'm going to do now is pause for a second and sew this gap closed. So I'm just going to pull up on my crochet hook to leave a loop there so that we don't lose our stitches or anything. And I'm going to grab this yarn needle, tapestry needle, whatever you'd like to call it. And I'm going to grab this tail that's left over from the first leg. I'm going to place it onto this needle. So the easiest way that I like to do this is pinching the edge and then pushing it through the hole and grabbing that end and then pulling it through. So anytime we are putting yarn onto the needle, that's my method of doing it. And now, just like you would with hand sewing, we're going to go back and forth to close up this gap. So the tail is attached to this leg here, so I'm going to go into this leg and find a spot where there's a gap and pull it all the way through. And then I'm going to go to the stitch next door on this same leg, and then the stitch right in front of that on the other leg, and pull through. And I'm going to do that a handful of times until there's no gap left in between the two legs. So now, as you can see, there's no gap in between the two legs. So I'm going to just remove this yarn tail from the needle and poke it on the inside of one of the legs. And now we're going to continue crocheting. So just placing this crochet hook back into the loop and pulling it tight around the hook. And now we are going on to round number 8, which rounds 8 through 12. So the next 5 rounds are all just single crochets all the way around. So just 1 into each stitch. So I'm going to do this for rounds 8 through 12, which is again a total of 5 rounds. And I will come back to you once I have made it to the end of round 12. Alright, we've now made it to the end of round 12. So I'm moving on to round 13, which consists of a decrease and then 3 single crochets all the way around. So let's do that together. So to do the first decrease, we are inserting into the front loop of the first 2 stitches, then yarning over and pulling that loop through those front loops, then yarning over and pulling through 2, and then doing 3 plain single crochets. So 1, 2, 3, then again a decrease, and 3 singles, then another decrease, and 3 singles. Then the final decrease, and 1, 2, removing the stitch marker, and 3 singles, and placing that stitch marker back. Now at this point I'm going to stop and start stuffing. So I'm going to pull up my crochet hook again to leave a loop here that's a little bigger, and I'm going to just get small pieces of stuffing and shove them down to the bottom of each leg. You can use the end of your crochet hook for this. I'm just using my fingers, but if you're having a difficult time, you could also do that. And I'm just going to add a little more right now, and then I'll finish adding stuffing as we continue. But for now, I'm just adding a little more. The main thing is you just want those legs to be filled, because if you keep going it's going to get harder and harder to reach the bottom of the leg, and you won't be able to add the stuffing in there as easily. So let's move on to round 14, placing my hook back in there and tightening the loop around it. Round 14 is a decrease, so into the front loop of the next 2 stitches, yarning over, pulling through those front loops, yarning over and pulling through 2, and then 2 plain singles. So 1 and 2, and then another decrease, and 2 singles, then the decrease, and 2 singles, final decrease, 1 single, remove the stitch marker, and 2 singles. And now I'm going to add a little more stuffing. And at this point I'm actually going to stuff it pretty full. Pretty much with all of the stuffing I want in the body, because after this next round it's going to get way smaller and it's going to be harder to add stuffing in there. We can add a little bit, but you won't be able to add very much because it's going to get harder to fit your fingers into. Alright, so the final round, round 15, is 1 decrease and 1 single all the way around. So going into the front loop of the next 2 stitches, then yarning over, pulling through both of those front loops, and then yarning over and pulling through 2. And then completing a regular single. And now another decrease, and then a regular single, decrease, regular single, then here's the final decrease, and removing the stitch marker, here is the final single. And now I'm going to finish off with a tail. This tail does not need to be as long because the only thing that's getting sewn here is the head, and we already left a long tail at the end of the head. So you can leave a long-ish tail, but it doesn't have to be super long. And then I'm yarning over and pulling through, and I am going to add just a little more stuffing on the top here, because having enough stuffing at the top of this neck is what's going to prevent you from having a wobbly head. So you want to make sure that you've got enough stuffing packed in there. So now that the body is completely stuffed and everything, you can take this tail and sew this closed, but since the head is going to be sewn right here and you're not going to see this gap anyway, I'm personally going to skip that part. So with that being said, now all the other steps are sewing pieces together. So we're going to start out sewing the head to the body, and then we'll have arms, legs, spots, horns, a whole bunch of stuff to sew. So a tip that I have for you guys, if you have longer needles like this, or even knitting needles, are great. These specifically are going to be used to hold items in place as we're sewing. So you won't even need your crochet hook at all anymore. You will just need your yarn needle, and then these longer ones I'm going to use to pin items in place. So I'm first sewing the head onto the body. I'm just going to place it where I would like it to be, something like that. You just want the eyes to be facing forward, of course. And I'm going to take these longer needles and poke them diagonally through the head and into the body so that it's holding the head in place. And then I'm going to do this on the other side like this. You don't want to push it too far in to where you're going to lose the needles, but just something like that. And then make sure you're happy with how the placement looks, which I like where that is. So now we're going to grab this tail that's longer. There are two tails left over, one from the body and one from the head. I'm specifically using the one from the head because that's longer, but I am leaving this tail out because if we run out of this one, we can still use this one as well. Now we are using the pinching technique to go ahead and add the tail to the yarn needle and pull it through. And then we are going to sew the head to the body to make them one piece. So I'm going to start out right here where this tail is coming from, and it's coming out of the head, so I'm going to start by poking it into the body and just pushing it through the body. You don't want to go all the way down here or anything. You want to just be right around here into the circle of where the head is. So pushing this through and pulling all the way until it's tight. And then going into the head, one of these last rounds here, to do the same thing. And pulling it tight. And now we're going to do that all the way around the head. So again, I'm now going to go back into the body. One of these stitches right here close to the head. Push it all the way through. And then same process into one of these stitches on the head. And then back into the body. Just like one stitch at a time, pretty much. Pulling through until it's tight. And then doing the same thing through the head. And I'm not going to make you guys watch me do this forever, so I'm going to cut the camera, but I am just doing this all the way around to where I started from. Okay, I've gone all the way around the head, so it is now fully attached. So I'm going to remove these long needles. Since it's in place now, we don't need those. And I have these two tails still left over. I didn't run out of the first one. So what I'm going to do is remove this tail from my needle. And I'm going to use the end of it to poke it inside the head so that I can hide that tail. If you'd like to cut it, you can do that as well. I would just cut like most of it off and leave a little tail and then poke the small tail on the inside. I'm going to do the same thing with this tail that's left over, so I'll show you that method. Go ahead and cut most of it off, and then using the needle, poke the rest of it into the project. Now, if you wanted the head to be extra secure, you could go around another time or two more times to get it in place, but this is like not coming apart. So I'm perfectly fine with just doing it the once. But if yours feels like a bobblehead or just doesn't feel very secure, go around another time or two with the tail before tucking it in or cutting it off. Alright, now we're going to add everything else. So my next step is going to be arms. So arms are just going to get sewn on right here where the head and the body meet. And we're just going to grab one of these long needles again and poke it right here. I'm doing it sort of in the center of the arm so that I can sew at the top of the arm. And then doing the same thing with this other arm in the center and poking it through the arm and into the body so that it gets held in place. And then using the yarn tail to sew it on. So I'm using the same sort of method that I did for the head, going into the body, pulling it through until it's tight, and then going into the arm and pulling it till it's tight, and then back into the body, pulling it till it's tight, and back through the arm. You can go through the front of the arm or the back of the arm, whichever is easier. And once I've done this like twice, I'm gonna go ahead and remove this needle because it's kind of in my way. And then I'm going to do this again. And if you don't want the arm to flip up like this, which I don't, because I feel like it's not as secure, what I'm going to do is go back into this body and poke my needle through right under the arm, like the armpit basically. And then I'm going to go just through these back stitches, so not all the way through the arm, just through these back stitches, and go through a few of them, stick the needle all the way through and pull it tight, and pull it down to the body, and then go back into the body right where it lines up and push it through and out. And I'm just pushing it back here, and I'm actually going to do that one more time because it still feels a little loose. So I am pushing back through where the yarn was coming out and where I pushed my needle through earlier, and pushing back underneath the arm, and then grabbing stitches underneath that arm, pulling until it's tight, and then going through the body and pushing through, kind of around the butt area almost, pushing that needle all the way through, tightening everything, and then, just like we did for the head, using the needle to poke the end that's left over into the body. So we're basically just hiding this end. And now I'm going to repeat for the second arm off camera, and then we'll move on to attaching everything else. Here is both arms sewed on. Next, I'm actually going to sew on one horn and one ear at a time so that we can see the placement next to each other and make sure that there's enough room and everything's going to look right. So I'm going to start with this side here, and I'm going to place the ear where I think it would look good. So probably like right there, and use this long needle to put that in place. And then I'm doing the same thing with the horn. Adding this in place. And the good thing about using pins is that we can always adjust to make sure it looks right before we sew it on, which is what we want. So I'm gonna go right here for the ear and for the horn. What I will say for the ear, it's cutest if you sew it like kind of pinched like that. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. So same method as always to get this yarn on the needle. And then I'm pinching the base of the ear kind of together so that I can sew it closer together, kind of more sandwiched together. And this is just a personal preference. You could sew it like in a complete straight line and it would be perfectly fine as well, either way. But I am just going ahead and sewing the two sides. So just using the same techniques. And then this needle's kind of in the way, so I'm removing it now that I have it in place. And I am still keeping it kind of pinched and just sewing it while it's pinched so that I get that effect. Again, that's completely optional and just personal preference. You could just sew it completely straight and it would be cute as well. Which I don't know if I'm explaining it very well, but essentially instead of just having the ear itself flat, I'm like pinching the base of it as I sew so that it looks like the outer edge is wider than the base, if that makes sense. So I'm just gonna finish up sewing on this ear, and then I'm gonna also sew on the horn and then do the same thing for the other side. Here is the horns and the ears sewn on. Now I'm going to do the muzzle, and then the last thing we have will be the spots. So for the muzzle, I'm going to use these long needles again, and I'm going to place them one on each side to hold this muzzle / nose piece down. So just added it to my needle. Just make sure this is even, which that looks good. So now I'm going to start sewing around the outside. And by the time I get about half of this sewn on, I'm gonna grab a little bit of stuffing and add that under the muzzle so that it keeps its shape and like sticks out a little from the face. So now I've finished sewing over here, so I'm just gonna remove this, and then I'm going to grab a little bit of stuffing. This might even be too much, we'll see. And yeah, that's definitely too much. You just need like the tiniest bit to place under this little nose piece. Alright, and now I'm just tucking this tail in. If you wanted it to be more secure, you could go around another time and sew it, but this isn't going anywhere. Alright, and the final step is sewing on these spots. So we have one larger one and two smaller ones. You can kind of place these wherever you'd like. I think I'm going to do the larger one down here, like on top of this foot. And then maybe the 2 small ones here. Something along those lines. So what I'm gonna do to kind of secure the spot of each one is I'm gonna take this tail that's coming from the center. So not the tail from the outside, but the tail from the back center. I'm gonna add that onto my needle. And then wherever I want the center of that spot to be, so I'd like the spot to be about right here. So the center would be about right here. I'm going to poke this through all the way to the other side of the cow. Pull on this. This end can just get tucked into the inside. So again, just pushing it in. And then this tail that's on the outside, I will add to my needle. And then I'm actually going to stitch it on. So I'm going to go right here next to the circle and put the needle through a stitch and pull it till it's tight, and then go into the spot and back out of the spot and then into the cow body again and back and forth, just like we did for attaching pretty much anything. So this is my method of doing it. I'm gonna do this for the last 2 spots as well, in roughly the areas that I showed you. And then that will be all for this little cow. Alright, with the little spots sewn on, here is what this little guy looks like, all completed. So thank you so much if you made it all the way through this video. I know this was definitely a long one, lots of different pieces to make and then be sewn on and everything for this little guy, but I hope you enjoyed if you did watch all the way through, and I hope you found it helpful in order to make your own little cow. Alright you guys, thank you so very much for watching today's video, and I hope you have enjoyed. I also hope you were able to successfully make a cow after watching this video. If you were, please tag me on social media or send me a DM. I'm at Katie Being Creative everywhere. I would love to see your final cows if you were able to in fact make one from today's video. If you guys did enjoy today's tutorial, please do give it a big thumbs up. It really helps out with the algorithm if you do go ahead and give it a thumbs up, because then it will push it out to other people that I'm sure will also, hopefully at least, enjoy this video. And if you enjoyed, of course, please do subscribe here on this channel. You'll be able to see all of the tutorials I have coming here in the near future. And if you'd like to check out katiebeingcreative.com for more free crochet patterns, you can find them all on there. All the written ones are on there, and a lot of them have YouTube tutorials here on my YouTube channel as well. But the ones that don't, I do plan on making tutorials for each one of them, slowly but surely. So let me know on my site which ones you would like to have tutorials for next. And finally, if you would like to see more from me, you can check out more videos of mine that are linked below, or you can check me out on all of my social medias. They are all at Katie Being Creative. And last thing, if you did want to check out any of these same materials that I am using in today's video, you can find links for all of them in the description box below. Or if you find my cow pattern on katiebeingcreative.com, you can also find all the materials linked within the written pattern. So with all of that, thank you all so much for watching. Again, I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial and found it helpful. I will see you guys here in the next one. Goodbye.